Today we're going to be building a fully customized React UI library. Think things like Material UI, Bootstrap, Chakra, Headless UI, those kind of things. We're going to add tests. We're going to add a package called Storybook so we can see all our components while we build them and all the different variations. We can add props and see how it affects our components. Finally, we're going to publish it to the NPM package repo so we can just import it easily into another project. So without further ado, let's get started. So I've created this folder here called UI. You can call it whatever you want. And I'm just going to open it in VS Code. And there's nothing in here yet. And the first thing we're going to do is run npm init. So the package name will be UI. Once again, call it whatever you want. The version, I'm going to start with 0.0.1. This will be like the beta testing versions. And then once it's ready to launch, I'll set it to 1.0.0. Description, set whatever you want. These things we can change later on. For now, I will just click enter through all of them. And now we will have our package.json. First thing I'm going to do is change this to MIT. You can look into what that means. It's not really a big deal. And the name of our project should be at your username. So mine is nickjaraj / the name of the package. So if your username is Adam, this will be at Adam /UI. Or this UI part could be whatever you want. My great library, or something like Material UI clone, whatever you feel like. Now I'm just going to change this description to personalized UI library and remove this useless script. The next thing I want to add is TypeScript, so I'm going to run npx tsc --init. And this should create a tsconfig file for me. And I'll click yes to install. It seems I have to install TypeScript first. Let's try that again. Okay, so I've installed TypeScript, as you can see here, but this should be a dev dependency. And actually everything should be a dev dependency because this is a package, and you'll see that later on. So within the tsconfig file, you can see by default it gives you absolutely every single thing. You can read through all the descriptions and see what everything means, but I'm just going to clear everything and replace it with what I use. So the first thing we need to set is the target, and I've set this to ESNext. This is basically the ECMAScript version that is emitted from your TypeScript. Or in simple terms, if you set this to ES5, then all the functions from ES6 and onwards, such as arrow functions, get transformed down into ES5 functions. So it's basically a target version of the JavaScript that comes out. ESNext is a special one that's just like the latest version that TypeScript has. But from the example I said just now, if I set this to ES5 and I wrote somewhere in my code an arrow function, it would just get transformed into this behind the scenes. But for our case, we just need to use ESNext. The next and probably most important one is this JSX here. I think by default it's set to preserve. I could be wrong, it might just be React, but I'll take you through a few of them. So preserve would basically keep the file as a .jsx. So I'm going to create a button component really quick. So let's create our source, our components, and let's create the button folder. In here, we'll have the button.tsx as well as an index.ts. So this, if I create a simple component, this tsx with preserve will be kept as a JSX. But if I did something else like react-dsx, this will be transformed into a .js. So the JSX turns into JS, but then behind the scenes it calls the JSX function to turn it into JSX, which is a React thing. You don't have to worry too much about it. Just set this to React or React JSX, whichever one you prefer. And in here, this is throwing an error because I haven't installed React, so let's quickly do that. And we also have to add the types. So @/types/react, if I'm not wrong. And with both of these, we should have no more errors. You can see if I comment this out, this code doesn't understand what the JSX is. It's just like, what is going on in this return folder? JavaScript doesn't have this syntax, so you just have to have the JSX mentioned. So these two are not so important. I'm just going to skip over them. This allow JavaScript one is basically saying don't allow any JavaScript to be part of this program. And actually don't need check.js because I don't have allow.js to set to true. So I'm going to remove that. More importantly, we have this declaration true here. So this generates the d.ts files. So anyone who imports your package will also get these .d.ts files. And that enables autocorrect for anyone using TypeScript. So if they import my button and I have some sort of prop in here, let's just quickly add a prop, show text, and if I had, I need to properly type this. If I had the .d.ts files emitted here, then this would go along with my package in some sense, and anyone who uses this button will see that there is a text prop. So this is very important. Make sure you set this to true, and the declaration dir is basically where it outputs to in our file. So dist is where all the JavaScript will go, and types is where all the types will go. This source map one is another really important one. It creates a source map file for the JavaScript files. So it basically really helps with error handling. So it gives the exact line of the code where the error is happening so that they can go into the source files and see what's causing the error rather than it being the JavaScript that's compiled. So then you'll see like very ambiguous errors where everything is compiled into like nonsense. So if you want to help people with their errors, I suggest you set this to true. For this emit declaration only, we set this to true because we're going to be using something called Rollup, which will handle all the JavaScript compiling. So we only want TypeScript to push out the declaration type files, because otherwise we'll be doing it twice. Allow synthetic default imports basically means if you're not exporting something by default, this will assume that you are. I'm not going to go through the rest of these. You can just read the docs or whatnot. I think the ones above were the more important ones to cover. So let's just move on. Next, I'm going to create all my index files. So let's add an index there and an index there. So within the button folder itself, we want to be exporting the button by default. So like that, you import this button and export default button. Within this index, this is the components index. So this is where we'll export every single thing. So we'll have the button, which we export as button. And then even further down inside the source index, we just import all from components. Sorry, not import, it should be export all from components. So when we bundle everything up, we're just bundling the source file, which will contain all the different components. And in here, we're exporting each component one by one. And in here, we are exporting the button itself. You might be wondering why we didn't just export from the button/button. It's just nicer to do it like this instead of doing /button/button. So that's why a lot of devs that I've worked with have used this method of using the button. So you can actually search the thing. So if I want to find the button, I could type it easily without just looking for index.ts. Hence the named button.tsx. And within here, we use another index.ts to make importing easier. I know this is really confusing. Just to make a little more sense, let's say I had another component that was called input, and so if I just did this index.ts style, so let's remove this for now, and there's the button. So this doesn't exist anymore. So everything is currently working. So I can export this, I can export the input, and all is fine. But say I have thousands and thousands of components. If I wanted to search something up, so I search button, I'll only see files called index.ts. And you can see here, it obviously makes sense that this is a button. But if I search anything, everything's called index. It's very confusing. Whereas if I had the input here called tsx as well, sorry, tsx, Then if I search input, it makes sense. I'm like, okay, there's the input file. And there's the file that exports it that I don't really have to think about when I'm searching for things. I just want to look for that. But I also don't want to export /button because it's really frustrating and ugly. So the next thing I'm going to do is to finally add Rollup, which is our package that's going to bundle all this TypeScript into JavaScript for our packaging process. So I'm just going to paste this. So I'm adding Rollup, a plugin called Node Resolve, a plugin for TypeScript, a plugin for CommonJS, and Rollup plugin DTS. So all of these are dev dependencies. Let me just let that install while I create a rollup.config.js. Within this file, I'm just going to paste everything. So here's all the packages that I just installed. And I'm going to take my package.json and use it here. So with that being said, I'll need to change the name and module because I'm referencing them. So if I go to my package.json, I will need to change this main to dist/cjs/index.ts, and the module will be here. So there'll be two different types of outputs. One will be CJS and one will be ESM, sorry. And if you look in here, CJS, ESM. And also source map true. If you remember in TypeScript, we want to put those source maps forward. So we are just going to initialize Git at this point because I want to push everything to GitHub. So let's quickly run git init and let's add a .git ignore. And in here, we'll just add the normal stuff, node modules, dist, and I don't like my yarn errors to be pushed, so I'm just going to put that as well. So in here, let's just git add everything, and I'm going to say add TypeScript and rollup configs. And I'm going to push everything upstream because I have an existing branch, and I'm just going to push everything up. So I'm on the main branch. Alright, now that's all done, there's a couple of other things we need to add to the package.json. So we have the types as well that are coming out here, which we point to dist/index.ts, the declaration files, and our files will be the dist file, which is what our rollup will compile to. And in here you can see that the output for our types will be dist/index.d.ts, which is exactly this. So our rollup is going to take the types from the ESM/type/index.dts and turn them into this. And that's using this plugin here, DTS. Whereas this object here is looking in the source.index, so this whole thing here, which exports all of our components and does all of the magic to turn it into a nice compiled package for us. In here is where you'll import button from at @nickdaraj/UI. I'm just going to add a quick commit, fix add missing fields from package.json. So the next thing I'm going to do is to finally add the script that we run to build rollup, and it's given me a few right here, but I'm just going to add a dev script which uses this watch flag, which basically means anytime there's a change in my files, it'll rerun rollup and make the changes, and the build one which just builds it. So if I now run yarn dev, I get an error. And the error is because I should be using an MJS rather than a JS, which basically means module. Let's try that again. Yarn dev. And it's telling me that require is not defined in ES module scope, which is what I'm doing here. So let's just change this require statement here into an import, like so, and once again, yarn dev. Another error, could not find module tslib. And the easy solution to that would be yarn add the tslib. And finally, we've bundled everything. So here we go, we've got our CJS and we've got our ESM. So in here, we can see somewhere is our button. This is all just compiled down into plain JavaScript without any types. All of this stuff is just React because we're creating a React library, so all of React stuff needs to be bundled in here as well. And you can see in here, we have our types. So our declaration files. You can see the types are here, and all should be working fine. So at this point, we're going to try and publish our library. I know there's no styles and there's nothing really interesting about this button. Let's actually add in the text here to use the prop itself. But to publish our library, we're going to need to add a field here called publish config, and this registry is npm package github.com/your username. So for you, it'll be whatever your username is here, mine /Niraj. And there's one other thing we need to do before we can actually publish, which is get an authorization key for GitHub. So quickly go over to your GitHub, go to settings and developer settings, personal access tokens, and then generate a new token. And in here, I'm going to call this npm registry. I'm going to make it expire in 1 day because I'm going to show this to everyone, which is bad. You should never, ever, ever show this to anybody. And the permission we need to give is write packages. That'll also give all repo access and read packages. So let's generate the token. And this will only show to you once, so make sure you write this down. Copy it. And then go to your .npm rc, and you need to create these 3 things. So the first one, registry equals registry.npmjs.org. That's just default. Then this one is at your username, semicolon registry equals the same thing as above. So mine is at Niraj. And then npm package github blah 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 auth token equals then the token that we just copied. So I'm going to put all of this in the description for you to copy. Obviously, without my code, I'll change it. And this won't even be valid by tomorrow, so don't bother. And once these are in there, click save, and all of these are done. Now for the moment we've all been waiting for, npm publish. And success! So if I now go to GitHub, and I go to my profile, I should see that I have a package, this UI package here. And 0.0.1, that's the latest one. And now I can go to another project and run npm install at Niraj/UI and install this package. So let's give it a go. So I've just created a brand new Next.js app and deleted everything in the page.tsx. And let's try add at Niraj/UI, our new library. You can see that it's fetching the packages, and here it is. Everything worked. So let's try import our button. So button, and there it is. It comes up. And you can see in here, property text is missing in type, but required in type props. Now let's dig into the button itself. And you can see this comes from a declaration type. So it actually gives you the whole component. You can see what's going on. You can see the types required. And so in here, if I add text, hello, this should be valid. Not sure what happened there, but let's try run the app and see what our button looks like. Obviously it's going to be unstyled, but let's just make sure everything worked. Yep, that isn't quite what I expected. So I just get a button rather than the div containing the text, and I'm not too sure why, but we can look into this. And I think I didn't save because it says here that the text is declared but never used, so I think it's just a mistake on my part. But the good news is that the package works, so we're going to fix everything, build it, and then publish the next version, 0.0.2. So we're going to go back to our button, and instead of just this text string, we're going to take in a variant, and I'm going to change this into an interface that extends all the HTML button attributes. So things like on click, disabled, and so on will be added to this. So let's just replace this with button props and put the variant there. So I'm going to create a, what's this? Color class, which if the variant is primary, then we're going to say blue, otherwise red. And in here, it's going to be a button that takes a style and color, or rather background color of color class, and all the other props are just going to be here. All these props are basically everything else from the button element. So if I look into here, I can see disabled, form, form action, blah, 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 blah. This is all just from the regular React button. And in here, we are going to pass props.children, because that's how our button works. So then we go to our package.json, change the version, run build, create our rollup files, and now we, once again, npm publish. So now within our Next.js app, we go in here and we change this to 0.0.2. Let's update the packages. Everything's fine. And here you can see it no longer takes a text prop. Instead, it should work like so. But it also needs a variant, so I'm going to give that primary. And let's run our app. You can see now that since it's primary, it's got a blue background. Let's change that to secondary. And it's red. So great, everything's working. We've got our props working, we've got our ugly styles working, and let's continue working on this. So the next thing I'm going to do is add CSS, because that button we saw just now was criminally disgusting. So I'm going to add a Button.css. Obviously this doesn't exist yet, so let me just create one. And now Rollup is going to scream at us because it doesn't understand what CSS is. We can see that error. Could not resolve from d.tss. And so we need to install some plugins. So in our rollup config, I'm going to add an import for postcss and add a plugin down here, postcss, invoke it just like all the others have been invoked. And obviously I'll need to install this. So let's add a dev dependency. And also down here, we need to add an external. So inside here, we'll have to add anything that is in any way CSS. And the easiest way to do that is to add this funky looking syntax. It just means anything that ends with .css, ignore it. And we only need to do that here because this is where our types are determined. And anything to do with types, don't care about styles. So add this here. And let me just double check if there's anything else. I will just add some settings within the postcss object, like so. So the extensions are the CSS, the minimize is to basically squish everything, source map we've discussed many times, and I don't think we need this. Yep, let's just go with that for now, see if everything works. And we've got an error, could not find module postcss. And that's because this doesn't come with postcss, it's just a package, so we're going to add postcss itself as well. And everything is working, great. So I've just gone off screen and added a bunch of styles because I don't think people want to watch me write CSS. So I basically said if it's primary, it's purple. If it's secondary, it's like an outlined purple with a white background. And I added a bunch of CSS here. And since this rebuilt, if I now look into the index.js, the dist esm index.js, I can see this CSS file here. And this contains all these styles that I've just put in, so our button should be styled properly. So let's just add a commit really quick, style, button styling. And now when I go into the version, I will bump it up to 0.0.3. And now I should be able to import this into my other project, and all the styles should be there. So let's give it a go. So once again, in the other project, we're going to bump it up to 0.0.3. Of course, I need to publish this first, so let's just run build just to be sure. npm publish, let it work its magic, and then here we should be able to install 0.0.3. All good. I don't think any of the types should have changed. And now if we look in localhost, we should have a styled button. It seems that some of the styles worked, but not the padding and such. So the CSS itself didn't get injected, but the inline styles did. So this is kind of a pain in the ass, having to go back and forth, import, update, versions, blah, blah, blah. So let's move on to the next part where we add Storybook. And Storybook is this wonderful package that lets you visualize all your components. It basically spins up a web server that has every single story that you've defined. So it'll be, you can have a story that says Button.stories, and then within that you can say a button has different variants, try render them all, a button has different text sizes, you can put in different props and make sure everything works as you intended. So let's go ahead and install Storybook now. So Storybook is a lot easier to set up. You just have to run npx sb init, and this should sort of read what your code is and figure out what needs to be installed and should set up the basic settings. So let's go ahead and proceed. And if you get to this pack, if you want to follow what I'm doing, I'm just going to use Webpack 5. So after a while, that'll finally finish and it'll actually spin up this web server. So I might be thinking that's not the button I just created, and you are right. This is a button that is within the stories folder here. So they've given us a few samples. They've given us a button, a header, and a page. So within here, you can see this is a whole header, different states, there's logged in, logged out, and there's an entire page. But for this example, we're going to be looking at something similar to the button. So it even creates a docs page for us. You can see all the different types. You can control it from here. It's super amazing. So let's go ahead and create the types for our button. So I'm going to shut down this server that's been spun up. And you can see in package.json, it's added a script for us, or two. So it's got Storybook, dev, and it opens on port 6006. You can change that if you want, and Storybook build. It's also downloaded a whole bunch of dependencies. And let's start by deleting all the stories. And we're going to create our own. Button.stories.tsx. In here is where I'll throw all the files. I'm just going to dump this in, then I'll explain what's going on. So we import from Storybook React. The meta is sort of like the metadata. This is the title, UI/button. This is just a divider. You could put, if you had loads of different sections, there could be UI, there could be components, there could be whatever you want it to be. And the component is the button that we're importing. Tags autodocs creates that doc that I was talking about just now. So the page called docs. Parameters, this is just to center the button, just so it looks a bit better. And we define our different stories. So we can have a primary story, which just sets the variant to primary, and the children is just click me, so the text within the button is click me. Args are basically arguments. We have a secondary, we have one with an on click, which just spins up an alert, and one that's disabled. So let's try and start up our server with yarn Storybook. And this should actually be a TS, not a TSX. Let's try and spin that up again. And we've got an error. Let's figure out what's going on. I'm sure that a story with that ID exists. Ah, here we go. Our button's just there. It just refreshed on the previous button. So this is what I wanted the button to look like. So it seems that the CSS is working with the on click. So if I click it, you can see it clicked works. And even within this docs page, you can see the different styles. So I've added a little bit more CSS. I've added a disabled section. I've also moved the hover down because I was writing it like it was Sass, not CSS by mistake. So I took this down here and added disabled. And also within here, I had to add if props are disabled, return nothing. So the primary and secondary colors don't override it. And finally, we spin up the Storybook and we can see. So we've got secondary, got children down there. And if we scroll down, we can see disabled. It even has the cursor, and the hover effects are now working. There was one thing I forgot to mention that's kind of key. Make sure to put React in peer dependencies, and make sure it's also the same version of React. We have React here, both 18.2.0. This just makes it so your package will work as intended. If this is a React UI library, make sure to put that in. Next thing I want to do is to set up Jest, which I've actually done without recording by mistake. So let me go through it again. So the first thing I did was add a script, which was Jest watch all, which is basically the same as watch from the rollup. It just watches for changes and reruns, and verbose prints out lots and lots of details. So it helps you catch any errors. And then I added this Jest thing here into the package.json, which says test environment JS DOM, which lets you test JSX elements basically. And I also added a whole bunch of packages. We've got testing library, Jest DOM, React. We've got types for Jest, Babel Jest, Jest, environment JS DOM. I think that might be it. But you can check the commit. I created a commit right before this called added Storybook and Jest, and see what needed to be added. I also created this test file, so let me just run, let me delete everything because I'm having issues with my modules. So I'll run yarn to reinstall everything. So I import everything up here. Here's that button that I wanted to use again. So button.test.tsx, and this is not by any means going to be a Jest tutorial. I'm just going to do a very basic set of tests. So the first thing we do is check for the button renders. Second thing is make sure the button fires an event when we click it, when it has an on click. Just use a mock function. And finally, make sure it renders with the correct classes. So since our button has this nick-garage-button class, we can test for that very easily. I'm just going to let everything resolve and then I'll come back. And once everything's done, we can finally run yarn test and see if our tests run. And we've got a failure. It seems that it's because of the CSS. So what we need to do to fix that error is to create something called stylemock.ts that just exports an empty object because we don't care about styles in tests at all. And then we have this here. So add a module name mapper. So anything.css will then just be thrown into this style mock. And now if we run yarn test, it should ignore the CSS. Yep, and everything's working. So I could even throw this down into the test folder if I want it to be cleaner. And I could technically just import from the button, like so. And that's pretty clean. And now to finally put an end to this, we are going to set this to 1.0.0. This is the first official live version, non-beta. And let's do a quick commit to 1.0. Make sure we build. Oops, yarn build. And npm publish, if I can type. And there we go, everything's done. We've officially styled our own component library. I'll be adding a lot more components in the next video. This is just a simple button tutorial. We've added tests, we've added stories, we've gone through TypeScript pretty in depth, and we've done a whole bunch of things. So if there's anything else you'd like me to cover in this topic, let me know, because I'm going to add a few more components like inputs, maybe a form in the next video to show you how we can expand on this UI library. Otherwise, hit me up in the comments below. Please like if this helped. I know it's a really long video. I'll see you in the next one.